Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Christopher Morris, co-founder and managing partner of the Sustainable Ventures Group, and I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this sixth and final instalment of Smart Transport's 6-week webinar series. Today, we will be exploring urban innovation and specifically investing for deliverable outcomes. We're living in pretty unprecedented times. You will no doubt have heard that said many times over the last few months, but it's definitely true. There have been global pandemics before, but few on this scale, and fewer still in the context of the highly connected, truly global transport system we've all grown used to. Despite plenty of negative column inches, I have for the most part found the global response to be heartening. There have been superhuman efforts across multiple industries, including of course healthcare, but also in transport and logistics. And we've perhaps seen something of a blueprint for the concerted human effort that will be required to address some of the other existential crises that we face as a species, including in particular climate change and resource scarcity. The last few weeks have seen the first small but encouraging steps towards the opening up of our society once again, and we all now have decisions to make. Do we do what is easy and encourage people to rush back to their cars, eschewing the new horrors of public transport? Or do we treat this as an opportunity to embrace new innovative transport solutions and to build back better? That choice is reflected too in our investment strategies. Whether you're a public sector body, a large corporate, a financial institution, or indeed a startup, the investment decisions you make over the months to come will have a profound impact on urban transport for years to come. I'm joined today by 4 excellent speakers in Shane Fitzpatrick, Gordon Young, Kit Allwinter, and Joe Daly, all 4 of which you should be able to see with me on the screen at the moment. They represent a diverse array of perspectives, from that of a large urban authority to those of an international finance house, a global energy business, and the world's premier infrastructure firm. Each speaker will speak to you, taking to the metaphorical stage for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. The session will be recorded and made available to all participants, so you will have time to revisit what they have to say at a later date. I'd encourage you to use the question feature in your dashboard and feel free to ask questions throughout, though note that those will only be addressed at the end once we've completed the final presentation. It's up to you whether you want to give any information about yourself or your organisation when asking those questions, but do specify if your question is for a particular member of the panel so that I can direct it accordingly. Personally, I can't wait to see and hear what our speakers have to say, so I think with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Shane Fitzpatrick from Liverpool City Region to kick us off.
Morning everyone, my name's Shane Fitzpatrick. I'm the Interim Director of Integrated Transport for Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and I want to take you through a perspective from freight rebalancing innovation from a Liverpool City Region perspective. As an overview for the presentation, we're looking at setting the scene in terms of the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and the Metromare as a structure itself. We'll then go on to look at the perceptions and reality of the ports and logistics in the city region. We'll then consider the supporting economic rebalancing and the importance of Liverpool City Region, the challenges that we face, and then tackling how these challenges will be evidenced in terms of data, innovation, and infrastructure. The CA originally established in 2014 for Liverpool City Region by bringing together what was former Met authorities, 5 inside Merseyside, and Halton, a unitary authority formed for part of Cheshire. We signed a devolution deal in 2015, and as part of that deal, electing a mayor in 2017, Steve Rotherham, becoming a mayoral combined authority. This has brought with it new powers and freedoms through an alignment of policies and funds, especially in relation to transport, housing and land use, and in particular a devolved and consolidated local transport budget with a multi-year settlement. The combined authority also has the ability to franchise bus services in the city region, subject to the necessary legislation and local consultation as enabled through the Bus Services Act in 2017. A key route network of local roads was also part of that deal, which will be managed and maintained by the combined authority through a single asset management plan, working towards a streamlined contractual and delivery arrangements across the city region. Also, as set out in our devolution agreement, Liverpool City Region are looking at alternative proposals for wider devolution of the Merseyrail Electrics network, the franchising arrangement which we have devolved to Merseytravel since 2002. This includes the management of rail stations and the wider rail infrastructure assets in the city region, including the tracks. It is worth mentioning that 1.7 billion of Transforming Cities funds, which is aimed at addressing weaknesses in the city region's transport system in order to increase access to jobs and prosperity. As a mayoral combined authority, we were awarded 172 million without the need to bid, which is to be expended as investment by March 2023. When we're looking at the history, Liverpool's first dock was the world's first enclosed commercial dock, called the Old Dock, built in 1715. Liverpool's docks dominated global trade in the 19th century, with the Albert Dock opened in 1846 on the right-hand side of the top of the screen. And at the heart, both port productivity saw a rapid decline in the 20th century. Demolition of Albert Dock was considered in the 1960s, despite it being a Grade 2 listed structure. But on the bottom of the right, this is the Albert Dock today. Perhaps not exactly today in the current climate, but is a vibrant retail and leisure offer, attracting over 6 million visitors a year. So what of the port activity in Liverpool today? What is the current reality? Whilst the old docks have now been repurposed, the Port of Liverpool has re-emerged as a important maritime gateway with the growth in container shipping. It is now one of the UK's top container ports, primarily because the largest volume and density of large warehousing in any of the UK region is within 70-mile radius of Liverpool's Peel Ports Master Plan, as Liverpool's Peel Port Master Plan set out to accommodate more than treble the number of containers by 2030 at 2.1 million containers. And 65% of the population of the UK and Ireland live within a 150-mile radius of Liverpool. Maritime transport is essential to the world's economy, as over 90% of the world's trade is carried by sea, and it is by far the most cost-effective way to move en masse goods and raw materials around the world. The opening of Liverpool 2 deep sea container terminal 4 years ago, allied with the widening of the Panama Canal, has the potential to significantly alter the economic geography for freight in the UK, opening up the opportunity for an increasing amount of goods from North and South America, China, and the Far East entering the country via Liverpool. It's a 400 million private sector investment in river container terminal, which will allow post-Panamax vessels of up to 13,500 TEUs to call at the Port of Liverpool. This trebles the port capacity of handling 95% of the world's vessels. Before the investment, just 5% could be accommodated at the port. It brings with it the benefits across Northern Powerhouse and the UK as a whole, but it is also dependent on improved infrastructure to disperse the additional freight. And this is because the majority of goods entering the UK do so from the southeast ports. And while some travel to the north via rail, there's scope for much greater modal shift from road to rail. Securing this shift requires additional capacity on the West Coast Main Line. And although the Northwest is already served by rail-linked distribution sites, an expansion in the number of strategic freight interchanges in the North is necessary. And the penetration of the port in terms of its reach to the UK population is greater from Liverpool than either Southampton or Felixstowe. The diagram on the left-hand side shows the imports coming in from India. 91% come through the southern ports, and yet 60% of the final destinations are north of Birmingham. This is a clear example of the current reality in terms of freight by rail today. Drax is a biomass-fired powered station near Leeds, which can process up to 12 million tonnes of biomass a year, which is delivered by up to 14 trains per day. Even with all the supply chain emissions considered, power generated has a carbon emission profile 80% lower than coal. Biomass in the form of compressed wooden pellets is imported by Liverpool through a 100 million custom-built import terminal and transported by rail to the Drax power plant. But because of insufficient capacity, each train generally takes over 7 hours and as often as 10 hours to travel 90 miles across the Pennines. If we look at HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail, this has to be part of the solution by freeing up space on existing lines for new train lines, local train services, passengers, and of course, freight. But the business cases for the lines are not mutually exclusive, with the benefits of HS2 and the Liverpool City Region predicated on Northern Powerhouse Rails being an integral programme. Our evidence shows a full and direct north-south HS2 and east-west Northern Powerhouse Rail connection will deliver an overall 15 billion boost to Liverpool City Region's economy. High speed is also particularly important in freeing capacity up for freight movements within the city region and from the city region to the national network. Up to 20,000 new jobs could be created throughout the city region from our freight and logistics aspirations. This will begin to address the problems in transporting freight by rail, as shown by the Drax example I mentioned earlier. The National Infrastructure Commission, recognising action is needed to enable UK's freight networks to meet growing demands for fast deliveries, whilst also reducing its impact on congestion and the environment. We are engaging with National Infrastructure Commission on these challenges. We need to reconcile trade-offs between the economic importance of this growth area, but against the adverse impacts of freight traffic and logistics operations. A clean freight system is needed. Electric vans are available, but action is needed to get charging networks ready for widespread use. And hydrogen or battery powered HGVs will need different types of infrastructure for refueling and charging. Better planning to help us manage congestion, allowing more deliveries at night, where operators commit to quieter practices and more distribution space is needed in cities so that depots are closer to the final delivery destination. Public Health England estimates air pollution is the largest environmental threat in the UK. Between 28,000 and 36,000 deaths a year are attributed to long-term exposure, and around 700 deaths a year in the Liverpool City region. Key interventions identify promoting a step change in the uptake of low-emission vehicles by setting more ambitious targets for electric car charging points, as well as encouraging low-emission fuels and electric cars. This applies to the movement of goods as much as the movement of people. Liverpool City Region has a rich heritage as a global mercantile and industrial powerhouse, harnessing its natural resources and talented people to be at the forefront of revolutions in industry, transport, energy, medicine, public health, and social justice. These areas are at the start of another revolution in order to successfully decarbonise our industries, homes and communities, whilst improving social economic base, plus the need to decarbonise its energy, industry, housing and transport assets. The City Region has related challenges associated with poor quality stemming from transport emissions in the main. Fundamentally, the consequences are able to transport enough freight by rail means the well-documented air quality problems are incongruous with our zero carbon commitments. We need to evidence to accelerate the pace of change to address these challenges. We need to understand the traffic levels and the current cutting-edge technology that continuously capture and classify traffic flows, providing real-time, uninterrupted, anonymous streams of data on all types of mobility. This helps ensure we can target investment in areas where we have the biggest impact on improving congestion and proving that the evidence that the highway engineering solutions will address the problems identified. The City Region is developing a more strategic and coordinated approach to managing and maintaining its road assets to help to reduce the delays and congestion, and have identified the key network for the local roads, which in our area represents 11% of the total highway of about 800 kilometres. We've appointed a key route manager to work closely with colleagues from Transport of the North, across the Highways Agency of Liverpool City Region and the Combined Authority to ensure the aspirations of the City Region are met, providing a KRM that safeguards and develops efficient and effective integrated transport movements. Data is key to this, and we need to embrace all modern technology has to offer. All alternative fuels are also part of the picture. Here in Liverpool City Region, we've invested in a network of electric vehicle charging points and are looking to develop a hydrogen capability. In fact, Liverpool City Regions is at the forefront of that hydrogen technology. BLC Lind in St Helens here in Merseyside produces hydrogen for industrial use. We're currently working with BLC to develop a new hydrogen refuelling station. We'll initially deliver 500 kilograms of hydrogen every day. Crucially, the project aims to demonstrate the commercial viability of the model, which installs refuelers for high-use fleets to develop a network for future use by passenger cars and other vehicles. Other examples include Innovin in Runcorn, who are working on electrolytic production of hydrogen that can plug into the energy from renewable energy sources such as offshore wind and tidal power. And ENSO, based at Stanlow here in Ellesmere, producing hydrogen from natural gases, and also Protos, which is converting unrecycled plastic to hydrogen at their plant also on Ellesmere Port. For the last mile of delivery options, electronically assisted cargo bike is the most efficient, environmental friendly option for delivery, especially in the city centre, combining the best of a bicycle and a small electric minivan, and greener freight options are rapidly becoming a viable option, coupled with the rollout of low emission zones. In the future, drones, often mooted to be just around the corner in reality, maybe a little space time off, due not least to airspace regulations as part of that, but will be more environmentally friendly and could completely change the cargo industry. And connected and autonomous vehicles will provide huge industrial and economic benefits that will much more needs to be done to unlock these benefits. The government's aspiration for the UK is to become a world leader in shaping of mobility. Now they recognise that we're on the cusp of profound change in what we move people, goods and services around towns and cities and the countryside. This is driven by an extraordinary innovation in engineering, technology and business models. The UK's rail and road network could dramatically reduce carbon reductions and other pollutants. Congestion could be reduced through the higher density use of road space enabled by automated vehicles. But it will require investment, such as the government's future mobility zone funding to drive the agenda forward. In summary, we need to address the challenges of freight and logistics related trips in the city region and major west-faced imports and logistics assets with localised congestion and air quality impacts from port and freight traffic. We also need to reconcile the disconnect and trade-off often seen between the economic importance of the growth area, but against the adverse impacts of freight, traffic and logistics operations on people and communities through noise, poor air quality, congestion. Decarbonisation and minimising the impact of freight operations will provide a practical demonstration of inclusive and clean growth model. To do this, we need to build up the evidence base and data hub for urban logistics to shape the solutions and identify the problems at a later stage, with a detailed understanding of our local distinctive markets and problems. Thank you. I'll just pass back to the chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Shane. I have a few burning questions, but we'll be well behaved and keep them till the end. So I think with no further ado, next up we have Gordon Young, Head of Vehicle Finance at Macquarie, and his holistic view of mobility innovation and associated investment trends. So Gordon, straight over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Apologies, I'm not in control of the presentation today, so it may be a bit patchy. Hopefully Jeremy is on hand to turn the pages. Investing in innovation is the heading there, and if we could just flick forward to the contents page, Jeremy, thank you. What I'd like to do today, talk a bit about Macquarie, the mobility landscape, some key trends, look at some economics, look at some transition and action, tell you a bit about who we are, what we've done. That's always important, particularly examples are always best. So we've got some examples in there. We're non-disclosure in some deals, so we've got some interesting transactions there that we can't share with you, but there is enough to hopefully whet your appetite and maybe touch on what we'd like to do going forward. Although my experience has told me that what we'd like to do and what we end up doing can be two entirely different things. Jeremy, if we flick forward, please. So Macquarie in the United Kingdom, Macquarie is sometimes described as the biggest bank you've never heard of, and this is just in the UK. So I'll give you an example there. 30 years in the UK since 1989, 12,000 people employed, 10 million plus meters owned by Macquarie. That's 1 in every 4 households in the UK has a Macquarie gas or electricity meter. Number 1 financial advisor for PPP Finance, 1,700 people across EMEA there, and the world's largest infrastructure manager. There's about 300 billion sterling assets under management. Macquarie's also got an S&P rating, Standard & Poor's of A, had that for 29 years, and it's got a 14 billion sterling market capitalisation. Interestingly, in terms of the infrastructure there, Macquarie is the lead on for those of you in London, I don't want to be London-centric, I'm far away from London, I'm actually in Glasgow at the moment, but the Silvertown project, which is the road tunnel going under the Thames to relieve congestion on the Blackwell tunnel, Macquarie's the lead now. It's a £1.2 billion investment there. Just moving on to the next slide. I'm sure everyone's seen this before. It's a bit old hat, but it's always worth touching on just in case there's anyone in the audience that hasn't seen it. Just those trends in mobility, sometimes known as ACEs, autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. And these are the key trends predicted to significantly transform the transportation sector. That's actually been knocking around for quite a long time, but it's still valid and still current. And I'll leave that with you I think most people will know that, so we'll just move on to the next one. Growth in the mobility sector, so ACEs in action, investment, production and user engagement, rapidly increasing, 87% fall in the lithium-ion battery costs, and transport is the biggest source of emissions in major markets, so it makes that move towards cleaner vehicles all the more important. And the next slide, please. And growth in the mobility sector, again, AC's in action. Global passenger electric vehicle fleet exceeds 7 million, and that's cut down there by country, region, and also some stats on the digital ride apps there, such as Uber, etc. Now, the next slide is that transition in action. So just some examples to where the corporations and public are actively transitioning to connected electric fleets. If we look at Amazon is purchasing 100,000 Rivian electric vans, that's the largest order of EV vehicles ever, probably the largest order of vehicles ever. You know, most surveying the independent, most British people want to install their own solar panels, and so on and so forth. And you can read that. You can read loads of stats, loads of newspaper articles which confirm that. Everyone wants to go green. That's the, you know, and certainly in terms of the fleets that we talk to and the companies, we have quite deep relationships with some large organizations, and everyone wants to go green until you tell them the cost of going green, and then they shelve it for a while. And I'll come to that later. It's just getting that parity, that point where going green is, you know, not much more or not significantly more expensive, and it makes it cost efficient to go green, or cost effective. Just moving on there, Jeremy, please. Specialised in asset finance, that's the division of Macquarie that I'm in within the mobility team. And this is just a bit about what we do. I won't labour in this, but it just gives you some idea of some of the relationships that we have and some of the sectors that we're involved in. Vehicle fleets, probably more so for this audience, vehicle fleets, shared mobility, charging infrastructure, batteries and stationary storage, and transportation infrastructure. And there's some other bits there like solar, wind in terms of the renewables, sustainability, bioreactors, waste management. I've got an example of that later on. And in terms of the energy side of the business, the meters and other stuff there. And moving on to the next slide, please, Jeremy. Just a bit again about mobility. Macquarie's focused on bespoke financial solutions, the sort of standard type transactions that are in the market in terms of just funding a whole bunch of ICE vehicles or fleets of vehicles aren't really that attractive to us. We're looking for opportunities where we'll fund the fleet of vehicles and also the charging infrastructure and maybe some other stuff alongside that. And there's some examples there of the types of things that we're looking for and some of the stuff that we're doing. And moving on, Jeremy, just some examples there of transactions that we have been involved in. If we just go on to that next slide. The Silver Jubilee Bridge in Cheshire, which was a reasonably sized infrastructure project. It was about 600 million. Macquarie's commitment was 115 million, and Macquarie acted as the lead sponsor, mezzanine debt provider, etc., etc. Another example, different end of the scale. I've tried to give a broad spectrum of deals that we do here. That Silver Jubilee Bridge in Cheshire is more of an infrastructure type deal. Moving on to the next slide, it will give you a much smaller and much more local transaction, and that is with regard to vehicle ownership. We believe that there's a move away from vehicle ownership towards subscription, and we took an investment, and we took an equity stake in a business based up in Boston and Lincolnshire, which is a vehicle subscription business called XL. And we provided them with a 10 million vehicle funding facility, which should ratchet up over time. And we also have the option to take additional equity subject to certain caveats along the way. Next one, back to the energy side of the business. Macquarie is the largest independent smart meter owner in the UK, 20% of the market, which as you'll appreciate, gives us some pretty deep relationships with many of the utility companies, which positions us well in terms of providing charging infrastructure support and investment in transactions of that type that require that. Final example, a bit off the wall, and I only put this in because I'm Scottish as well, and it was up here. Waste management, and this is just really, if you just go to the next slide, please, Jeremy. It's just really to provide an example of a transaction that was completed by Macquarie's Green Investment Group. That's based in Edinburgh and London. The Green Investment Group was a purchase by Macquarie Bank back 3-4 years ago. Cost 3 billion sterling with a condition that Macquarie invests 1 billion per annum over the following 3 years, which it's done. And we work closely with the guys in Green Investment Group in terms of anything that's with regard to the environment. Finally, if we just get to the final page there, the contacts, it's myself and my colleague Anant. We'd love to hear from you if you found anything in that presentation interesting. What I'll try to do there is just give you an overview of Macquarie, who we are and what we do, provide some examples of projects and financing that we've completed. We're in discussion at present on a number of other opportunities, and they're mostly vehicle charging related. If we go back 18 months, I would say that 1 in 4 of the transactions that we looked at were vehicle or charging related. Now that's probably, I think it's 3. It's about 75% at this point in time. I'd be happy to take any questions later, and also happy to hear from anyone. Contact details are on the back of the deck there. Just ping me an email, give me a call, and I'd be happy to chat through anything. And I'll leave it at that at the moment. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Gordon. Again, lots of food for thought there. And personally, I look forward to asking you how you feel some of those trends might change in the context of the current pandemic and its subsequent social and economic impact. But for now, we'll move on, and I'm delighted to be introducing Kit Allwinter from ACOM. So Kit, take it away.
I hope everyone can see my slides. That's the important thing.
We can indeed.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. I'm Kit Allwinter. I'm a consultant over at ACOM, but I worked full-time before that on secondment to TfGM as part of their innovation team, and that's kind of how I ended up involved in the smart transport world. And as part of that, and before that, I'd been working to mobility as a service, mobility hubs, connected autonomous vehicles, using technology to make services more accessible to disabled and vulnerable groups, and not to mention all the other stuff to do with smart ticketing, account-based travel, looking into the urban realm and road space reallocation, the stuff that is our day-to-day bread and butter. I've also won today's prize for the topic title that sounds most like it was written by a committee. It's a pretty comprehensive piece of word salad, this, isn't it? World-class connections that support long-term sustainable economic growth and access to opportunity for all. Now, as that stands, that would fit perfectly in the executive summary of pretty much any council's transport strategy. It's a pretty good vision statement for pretty much any transport company, and in fact, it would be a solid stand-in for any technology company's big idea. Whether you're BT, Arriva, or Cambridgeshire County Council, this topic's title could work for you. Looking at the audience for smart transport, and in particular how many firms claim to be combining technology and transport in new innovative solutions, this title is probably worryingly close to descriptors for a lot of firms currently on this call. And to that end, if you haven't got a mission statement and want one, I'm a consultant, so I'm for hire, so come and see me. I've got one that you might just be interested in. But more importantly, what does that mean? When I first started thinking about this topic, it was in the heady days of February, when we were still allowed outside. I don't know if you remember that place, but it's quite nice. And innovation in transport was very much focused on technology. It was mobility as a service, the Future Mobility Zone competition, DFT, demand responsive transport, apps and smartphone wizardry, that sort of thing. And I'm kind of reminded of the apocryphal story of Albert Einstein, who one day was walking through the quad of the university where he was lecturing, and a doctoral student came up to him and said, Albert, I won't do the accents because that would be potentially offensive. Albert, Dr. Einstein, have you set your senior students their exam? And he said, yes, I've just come from doing it. I've just set them now. But the doctor said, the doctoral student, I've just seen the paper. It's the same paper as last year. It's the same paper. It's the same questions that you asked them last year. What are we going to do? And Albert said, no, that's right. I purposely set the same questions as last year to the same students. And the doctoral student quite rightly asked, well, why? What's the point? What can we learn? And he said that the questions haven't changed, but the answers have. Whilst we might not be talking about such seismic changes as a theory of general relativity, we're still looking at a definite focus shift in looking at the world of transport and mobility. If we return to my word salad, world-class connections, if mentioned last year, probably meant Heathrow Airport and its multimodal access, or the Shanghai maglev. These were things that were held up as being new and exciting. Now the cities that are leading the way are Bogota and Paris, cities racing to roll out safe infrastructure for the post-lockdown world. Back in December, we were looking at public bike share, car club, DRT, and encouraging transfer from cars to mass transit. Sharing was going to be key. Sharing was the future. Efficient use of space, efficient use of assets. Now we're certainly looking at how we can encourage individualized transport options while still fighting to avoid a mass shift to car and all the many, many problems that car-based mobility systems have: congestion, severance, pollution, isolation. Some of these solutions might be the same too. After all, the problems of the car haven't changed, but the emphasis we will need to give them has. To take an example, e-scooters in the UK have gone from being a medium-term option, with the DFT saying, well, in the fullness of time, and consultation is important, and when we fully understand the ramifications, to this week, the guidelines for their trial across the UK being rushed out for comment. Cycling and walking infrastructure schemes, which have long struggled to squeeze space from car-dominated streets, are suddenly going into places that wouldn't have been considered a few months ago. 100 kilometres in Liverpool, Park Lane, as that photo shows, in London. Segregated cycle infrastructure has long been known to be part of the solution to our transport crisis, but events and a different spin is suddenly needed and is giving them impetus. In this case, social distancing rather than clean air. So if that now is what it takes to be world class, what about the other bits of my word salad? Well, connections, that's what we do. We connect places and people. And in these COVID times, it's doing that with minimal interaction between the people themselves. So mobility hubs and interchanges are an exciting challenge, as of course are nearly all the mass modes of transport. But what I want to get onto is the second half. So let's start with long-term sustainable economic growth. Let's look at long-term because we have an immediate problem here. Transport and land use planning both have incredibly long horizons. We're still dealing with the fallout from the beaching cuts and the resultant isolation of communities and suburbs. Leeds was proudly the motorway city of the 70s, and these decisions from 50 or 60 years ago still haunt us. Declining high streets due to out-of-town shopping centres and excess traffic. All the well-known unintended consequences are still ones that we're basing a lot of our investment decisions around today. Whatever solutions we enact now will need to be future-proof and need to work over a long time period, especially when we look at the cost horizons. We just heard about investment decisions and payback earlier, yet from a societal perspective, our current arrangement is all wrong. The costs to society far outstrip the costs to the individual, especially in the case of our most favoured and most subsidised mode. If we want a long-term viable option in society, then walking and cycling will actively pay us dividends once we factor in externalities, whilst mass transit is a significantly more cost-effective way of moving people than the private car. If we look at sustainability, then the problems are pretty similar. If we look at figures from Australia and the state of Victoria in particular, then the emissions profile of our current system is pretty atrocious. These figures only look at moving costs rather than those built into the vehicles themselves, hence why an EV car is apparently completely clean. And again, we're not even including particulate emissions or noise emissions or so many other factors that make our current and immediate future transport systems quite so problematic. The questions haven't changed. Transport is still about how we can fundamentally move ever more people in a finite amount of space. That we've ignored public transport, walking and cycling, which are significantly more efficient at doing this, is a pretty worrying sign, as the figures below that line show. Cars travelling at 30 kilometres an hour, as I believe these figures show, take up a huge amount of space per person, space that we simply don't have, space that we've long surrendered to that most inefficient of modes. So long term, we need to radically alter road space from the current allocation. But long term is, well, long term. And as you might be aware, we currently have somewhat of a pressing public health crisis on our hands. We need to do this urgently as well. As I mentioned at the start, the world-class cities are now the ones that are boldly reclaiming the streets for their citizens to use, rather than storing select few's metal boxes. COVID-19 means that space for sustainable modes is now more important than ever. And this leads us onto the last line, the last ingredient of my word salad, equality of opportunity for all. We have known for a long time that the status quo is not equal. My former university classmate, Dr. Helene Kreis, for example, completed her PhD in how pollution from private cars disproportionately affects those in lower socioeconomic groups. It's worth noting that people in city centres or in inner suburbs have lower levels of car ownership, yet deal with the congestion and pay the costs of other people's modal choices every day. COVID, however, offers an even more pressing problem. Now these people won't have the long-term impacts that Shane brought up in the Liverpool slides, asthma or increased isolation through severance or decreased ability to concentrate from noise and pollution. But through being forced into inadequate public transport spaces, these people may directly catch COVID and some of them will die. Access to opportunity for all, this is not. Car users have long been prioritised and now everyone else is at the risk of paying all too high a price. So what we need, therefore, is a revolution. But before I break into Do You Hear the People Sing and lead a socially distanced march on Whitehall, we should perhaps look at that for all element a little closer. Because for all could lead to many different words, and then this chunk of my salad can have a load of different tastes and textures. For all people of socioeconomic classes? Sure, we just looked at that. What about for all trips? We currently prioritise commuting journeys 9 till 5, undertaken predominantly by white, middle-aged men. What about shopping, education, shift workers, community support and community nurses? Equality of opportunity for these trips, access for those trips to be made, would mean rejigging how we talk and model transport at a very basic level. COVID-19 has shown, though, that a lot of these cosseted peak hour commuters, a lot of the pale, male and stale men driving their cars through the lives of others that we currently base all of our modelling around, can actually work from home. Is now the chance for that rethink? Instead of thinking about commuting, which for many might be replaced by telecommuting, what does this mean for the solutions that we're now offering as transport innovators or as councils keen to bring in new citizens and new people? Enabling trip training by other modes, perhaps? Is that hopper tickets? Is it all-day fares? Better bicycle provision outside nurseries and supermarkets? If we've declared revolution and a new year zero, what are we replacing all of these car trips with? And how can we roll it out quickly and effectively? How can we bring people, crucially, along with us? How can we bring people along? We can be sure that the men we inconvenience will shout loudly, whilst the trips we enable that don't yet exist or can't be modelled easily and don't yet have a lobby fighting for them. How in this age of straitened public finances can we build the business case for things that don't yet exist in the modelling and are outside of our comfort zone and we don't know how to price? Cars are easy. We know cars. If it comes to something new, something innovative, something people on this call do, like demand responsive transport. Then we return to my DFT response from earlier. And suddenly it's, I think we need a study, and we need to look at the full ramifications. And in the fullness of time, we'll arrive at something. You cannot tell how many people want to use a bridge by looking at the number of people swimming across a river. How can we bring decision makers into the room to consider the innovative solutions that everyone on this call probably has in their heads or in their business plans? Can we even get some of those angry commuters to reconsider their options and help us to make that shift? The questions haven't changed. Space is still a premium. Car travel is still too dominant, and transport systems cost society too much and emit far too much carbon, noise, and air pollution. Maybe the answers haven't even changed. Bikes, walking, public transport. But the urgency has. If we can't make the change now, then we're in trouble, because the future isn't waiting for us. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Kit. A really excellent presentation there, and delighted to see these generational questions kind of reframed in our new world. We're doing pretty well for time, so many thanks to all the panelists for that. But with no further ado, we'll move straight on to Joe Daly from BP Advanced Mobility. So Joe, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so for those who don't know me, I'm Joe Daly, and I live in BP's Advanced Mobility unit. And in that unit, it's my role to lead on partnership activities with cities, transport operators, and mobility companies. Now, BP Mobility is a relatively small team. We have a presence in the UK, Germany, China, and the US, but our vision and our sort of remit is really broad. And I guess quite simply put, we were established to help the company and our partners navigate this changing world of energy and mobility. Or perhaps more simply put, even than that, we exist to find better ways of moving people and the things they need. And so today I just thought I'd take you through some of the activities that we are in action with. If I could move my slides. Oh. Apologies, my computer seems to have decided to. Great. Why, I guess for me, is why did I want to take a fleets lens to my sort of talk today? And I guess it's sort of, I've been struck really recently at sort of conferences and events how quickly we move to conversations that focus on helping consumers navigate the change from an ICE vehicle to an EV. And while that is arguably an incredibly important conversation, focusing only on the consumer risks not thinking through what fleets might need to support them transitioning to this world that is EV as well. And the importance of fleets isn't something that's lost on BP. I mean, just in Europe alone, we have 20,000 stations, across 29 countries, and we manage around 250,000 fuel card transactions every day. And our sort of support for fleets and working to enable them to deliver their missions isn't new news. And effectively, powering business has long been our business. And I loved these the images that we found in the BP archive, and they demonstrate to me really how similar the missions of fleets have been and are today. So we could swap out fast delivery for last mile. The image which has got taxis and commercial vehicles on it stands today. We might add ride-hail vehicles into that mix. And perhaps actually what's most different, and is clearly different, are the tools and technologies that fleets have available to them to help optimize vehicle management and journey routing. But while the missions of carrying people and things are relatively similar over time, the sort of urban environment and the context in which fleets are operating is incredibly different. I mean, we could just take London alone. We've got around sort of 8 to 9 million people in the capital today. We're going to have nearer 10.5, 11 million by 2040. And that means that there's a demand for an extra 6 million trips within that urban zone. And we need to provide for those trips without contributing to worsening air quality and without increasing sort of greenhouse gas emissions. And so in tackling that, we've seen regulatory interventions and various carrots and sticks, whether that's the introduction of ultra-low emission zones, sort of reconfiguring the urban realm to accommodate more walking and cycling. And we've also had announcements or ambitions to reduce the amount of freight traffic in central London by the mid-2020s by around 10%, and the total London traffic by 10 to 15% by 2040. But the sort of challenge that represents, I mean, we can't miss. It just, last mile delivery alone is seeing a huge growth in the number of vehicles on our streets. And there are a range of reasons behind the sort of growth in last mile, but two of them, I guess, are always front of mind. First, the need for more frequent collections of delivery companies that feed our just-in-time supply chain. And secondly, the rise in e-commerce, where we've got the sort of consumer trend for convenience is driving far more in terms of online shopping and home delivery service. Now, this has catalysed a range of changes in the fleet landscape. We've had the acceleration to electric vehicles, or activity to accelerate the transition, and that's something I'll turn to next and focus on. But we've also seen new vehicle modes or fleet mixes come to our streets. So micro hubs with fleets of street-friendly electric vehicles, tricycles, as well as middle-sized panel vans, e-cargo bikes, and in the future, perhaps delivery drones. And indeed, BP's been sort of experimenting, I guess, or testing the use of different fleets itself. As part of a recent testbed activity in the Netherlands, we ran an on-demand delivery service where we used bicycles to deliver convenience goods ordered from our stores within 30 minutes. But it's not only sort of conventional fleets that are sort of on our streets today. The sort of growth of the shared economy and the growth of car clubs and peer-to-peer car sharing means that ownership and usership behaviours are and will continue to change. And the sort of rise of ride-hailing has created new ecosystems of what are B2B2C drivers, sort of bound by common aims and common activity sets. And these, I guess, you might term unconventional fleets. But whether conventional or unconventional, all of these require sort of vehicle management services and access, in the electrification sense, to charging. But when we ask fleets sort of what's driving their transition, we get generally two answers. One around city regulation, so the introduction of clean air zones, and the other an ambition to help the world transition to net zero, an ambition that BP shares. But you hear also that that sort of ambition to transition is met with certain challenges. So earlier this year, we commissioned some research to try and really get under the skin of what that might be. So we, with London First, surveyed over 500 fleets across the UK. And the headlines probably aren't surprising. We found that about 80% of business leaders thought it was incredibly important to transition their fleets to electric vehicles. The same proportion of those operated fleets felt the same. About 30% of the businesses that we surveyed had already started transitioning the fleets, and the vast majority of the others had set out plans to do the same. And around half of those, so around 250 of the firms, thought they would have fully transitioned to EVs within the next 5 years. But as Gordon mentioned in his comments, when asked why they weren't transitioning faster, unsurprisingly, cost was cited as the largest single barrier to EV adoption, closely followed by a lack of charging infrastructure and a low availability of vehicles to purchase. And that rationale actually sort of chimes and isn't dissimilar from the sort of the concerns that we hear from consumers. So last year we commissioned a survey of over 12,000 consumers across Europe and asked them what was they perceived as the barriers to transitioning to electric vehicles themselves. And again, we got cost, the lack of charge point infrastructure, battery range, and charging time. So if we're going to drive EV adoption, there's clearly a couple of things at play. One is providing that infrastructure that they need, but second, something around clarity of information to give people the confidence to make that switch. And the sort of questions that we're often asked by fleets and where BP wants to help play a role in answering is things like, which journeys are suitable for EVs versus ICE vehicles? Which vehicle should I transition first? How much would it reduce my total cost of ownership if I transitioned my fleet to EV? But also it's more than the vehicles. What's the right charging model for me? Do I go for depot-based charging? Is it on-the-go charging? What if my drivers are owner drivers? How does all of that business come together? But also, interestingly for us as well, the fleet businesses weren't just thinking about how they moved things differently. they were also starting to think more innovatively about how they help their employees move differently, with around 40% of the firms having in place or encouraging actively lift sharing schemes. So to turn to what we where we're in action in electrification. So electrifying fleet is at the heart of BP's activity, and we are in action around the world. And I just thought I'd call out a couple of examples. So in the UK, in 2018, we bought ChargeMaster, now BP ChargeMaster. BP ChargeMaster is the UK's largest public charging network. We have around 7,000 points and around 40,000 customers. But to serve fleets as well as the B2C, our B2C customers, last year we also launched our first fuel and charge card, so that fleets had access not only to our fuel stations on our strategic roads, but also to charging. In China, we announced last year a joint venture with Didi. So Didi is the leading multimodal transport platform internationally. It has around 600,000 electric vehicles on its platform and around 550 million users. And under that joint venture, we're going to work together to roll out a network of fleet EV charging hubs in cities across China. And in Germany, we are also in action. So we're rolling out EV charging infrastructure, but also and sort of recognizing now that it's not just the typical fleet vehicles we have to serve. I'm really pleased to say that this week, the Berlin public transport operator, BVG, opened a multimodal hub under its Gelby network on an Aral site in central Berlin, Aral being the BP brand in Germany. And that gives us a real opportunity to start to unpack how people are moving differently and how that interacts with our current retail footprint. But when it comes to providing the EV charging solution for fleets, for me, it's important to think about convenience, and for convenience is an absolute key. And when I think about convenience in terms of a charging network, I think about two things. So first, I mean proximate, so it should be broad, accessible. You shouldn't have to travel very far to access EV charging, but the charging should also be done at pace. And for those of you who've heard me speak at various conferences, you'll know only too well that we at BP, and me in particular, think that ultra-fast charging will be a really important element of our future charging ecosystem. Now, that's not to say that every charger on the network will be ultra-fast. It'll be a mixed economy of slow charging, residential charging, on-street, destination. But for fleets, we think that access to ultra-fast charging will be really key. But to sort of unpack that a little, what do I mean by ultra-fast? Well, today a rapid charger, 50 kilowatt chargers, delivers around 100 miles of range in about half an hour. Ultra-fast 150 kilowatt chargers, so today's technology, will deliver 100 miles of range in about 10 minutes. And BP's working and believes that ultra-fast charging, we could get down with sort of new technologies to around 5 minutes. So, or less than 5 minutes, mimicking the sort of fueling experience that we have today. And to do that, we're working with an innovative technology company, StoreDot. It's an Israeli company that has a novel lithium-ion technology. And last year, we showcased charging that battery in a two-wheel EV, first in sunny Israel and then in wintry Stratford. And both times, I'm really pleased to say, the charging time was sub 5 minutes. But why do we think that ultra-fast charging is important for fleets? Well, it goes without saying, fleets are time poor, and every moment that they are plugged in, they're not turning a profit. And so to help deliver on this need, BP, through BP ChargeMaster, is now rolling out 150 kilowatt chargers at scale in the UK. So creating a really, truly nationwide network. And this hasn't been without challenges. We are learning a lot along the way, and we're really pleased to say that we're working with the DNOs to learn with us so that we can deliver on this. And as for whether it's wanted and it's needed as a solution, the fact that we have 5 chargers on our Hammersmith forecourt that continually have queues, I think says that the demand is there. And I guess the final thing to say was I was struck when I was looking at how BP's been responding in the COVID crisis, how many of the sort of activity sets and initiatives that we launched sort of relied on fleets, whether that was, providing fuel for the helicopters or to the emergency services, providing free EV charging for app-based companies who are moving NHS workers, and with this multimodality in mind, also helping make Brompton bikes available. And for us, we don't want to just support fleets in the past, now in these times of evolving and uncertain times, but in the future. And we want to build on the tools that we've got, whether it's fleet expert and management tools, so to develop those solutions that fit for fleets today and multimodal fleets as they come. So I guess sort of here is a bit of a call to arms. If you've got ideas and insights that you think would help, just to come and let us know. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Jo. So right now we have, I think, approximately 15 minutes for questions, but I'm sure we can overrun slightly if necessary. If my panelists could all reactivate their webcam, that would be very helpful indeed. I'll just give you a moment to do that. Almost seamless, excellent work. And just a reminder to all of those in the audience that you can submit your questions through the online widget that you should find in your dashboard. There's a question mark to click on there. Please feel free to do so directly, and to specify a particular recipient if you have one in mind. I'd like to kick off first of all, developing on Jo's focus there on the transition to an electrified transport system, and focus in particular on trends post COVID-19 and what impact our panelists believe that the pandemic and the economic response to it might have on our adoption of electric vehicles, and some specific challenges related to that. Jo is the one who's just been talking about that. Do you want to have first crack?
So, I don't want to speculate on sort of how the current pandemic may or may not change the vehicle mix, but I think what's really important during these times is that we don't take our eye off the prize of deploying that network and infrastructure. That's going to be really important to sort of to enabling those future fleets, whether they're sort of fleets, corporate fleets, ride-hailers, or actually our B2C consumers. So, we're completely clear-sighted and clear-eyed in making sure that we roll out that infrastructure, and at the same time make sure that people have the information they need, so that they hop into an electric vehicle, they get the chance to use it and experience it, with the hope that they will then go and plug one in permanently.
Excellent, thank you, Jo. Gordon, do you have anything to add to that, given the focus of your presentation?
Sorry about that, I was muted there.
No problem.
Just one very quick point. I've been banging on for years about subscription, and I've been totally wrong up till now because it's not a great take up. But I do see the possibility of quite a significant uptick in subscription models post COVID-19. I think I could sit here today and within 5 minutes I can have a Nissan Leaf for 449 quid a month. That is a £30,000 car. That includes charging, that includes maintenance, that includes insurance, it includes everything. I think many people will be, there's no capital expenditure with that apart from the first rental. There's no ongoing costs, and the response to any economic impact such as COVID in the future is very simple, because you're on a monthly subscription. You just hand it back. I think that will appeal to a lot of people. I think there could be an uptick in subscription. I've been saying that for years, totally wrong up till now, so maybe no change there.
Thanks, Gordon. I mean, I suppose we have seen an increase in more flexible personal finance solutions for vehicles over the last few years, which is at least a step in that direction, and which presumably does open the door to quite rapid changes to a different fuel mix where there's the demand for it.
Sorry, yeah, absolutely.
Any of our other panelists like to contribute anything on the transition to electric vehicles, and in particular any impacts that the pandemic might have?
I think one that's been quite interesting has been to look at the significant uplift there's been in the increase of sales of electric bicycles, and how they offer the increased range and the easy journey that a car does, but without any of the space requirements of a vehicle. They're much easier to charge because the battery can just come off and come in with you and be plugged up in a in your home socket. So you don't need all the infrastructure that was required for a fleet and all that sort of stuff that we've heard about today. And whilst it's not a solution for everybody and it's not a solution for every journey, it's very much, I think, an interesting opportunity for a lot of people who've bought one of these as a result of the pandemic to try and experience that exercise or their daily whatever it is that they bought it for, to bring that into their daily commuting lives. And we might see an increase in electric vehicles in that regard, rather than necessarily just electric cars. And I think that whilst obviously carbon emissions and decarbonising the fuel, the vehicle transport system is very, very important, all the other externalities that come from it, the particulate pollution from the tyres and the brakes, the stuff around the severance calls, the isolation, the fact that a street full of cars is still full of cars and not usable economic space for markets or for people, whether they're internal combustion engined or electric, means that we still need to drive people away from those vehicles and into other alternatives.
And just to pick on that piece on the rise of the e-bike, and be interesting to see how quickly sort of shared micro mobility solutions come back to our streets. But there as well, increasingly, we talk a lot about providing the EV charging infrastructure for the cars, but actually in the city, as they evolve and we sort of incentivise this use of active travel, thinking more carefully when we're planning and designing in charging infrastructure for those modes as well as the cars. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that.
Thanks, Joe.
Just a quick one from me, Chris. I was going to say, I think it's part of the challenge of air quality and health. So it plays a really important component for that. If we talk about the additional exercise, walking and cycling in terms of obesity, because some of those challenges were there before COVID, they'll be there after COVID. And it's really how we might accelerate how they may be built in as part of our recovery plan. So there's quite a unique opportunity for all across the country, and certainly for city regions leading on quite dense urban areas.
Thanks, Shane. Joe, before we move on from electric vehicles specifically, your presentation clearly highlighted the importance of ultra fast charging from BP's perspective. Now, the more cynical in our audience might argue that that's unsurprising from an organisation that has tens of thousands of forecourts at their disposal. What would you say to those that suggest, with battery capacity and performance ever improving, that the vast majority of fleet journeys, as well as personal journeys, may well be completed with a single charge, limiting the need for in-journey ultra-fast charging or forecourt battery replacement of the kind you suggest?
So for the vast majority of EV owner drivers, home charging is a great solution and will serve their needs. I can't argue with that. But there will be always times when you need on-the-go charging because you're having an unexpected journey, and or there are people like myself who, I live in a flat in the London's capital. There are trees on my street. There's no local charging. The idea, I'm just never going to be able to charge at home. And I personally would rather go and spend 5 or 10 minutes on or off a forecourt, and when we're rolling out charging in China, it's off forecourt charging, than spending 30 or 40 minutes in having a less than seamless experience somewhere else. So, but also that as well talks often when we have this conversation about long distances. You're thinking of personal drivers, not your ride hailers, your last mile delivery men, your Uber drivers who are high mileage inner city drivers, and there just isn't the coverage of charging that they need. And also, to be frank, lots of our forecourts aren't big enough to provide the number of chargers that they'll need if they're going to power those fleets. So it's got to be a mixed economy of solutions. You hear it all the time. There's not one size fits all, and it's absolutely true.
Thank you very much, Joe. Just a quick question to Jeremy and the organisation team. I am not seeing too many questions coming through from the audience, which may be that our wonderful panel have answered so many of them in their presentations, but I just want to check that that isn't a technical limitation at my end. So please drop me through a private message if there is anything I'm missing on that front. That said, I'm more than happy to grill the panel myself in the meantime. So I think we've covered a number of the items that I wanted to initially, but I think the other area I'd like to dig down into a little before moving away from COVID-19 as a driver. I don't want us to get too focused on that. And that's to really all of the panel, but I suppose in particular to Shane, given his local authority context. Given the financial challenges across the board as we enter what is likely to be a relatively sustained recession, how do we drive change around, for instance, things like active travel that are going to require some infrastructure changes, where there can be quite a significant net cost and frankly, budgets are already being stretched?
I think a couple of things about active travel. I mean, the government has announced active travel investment 1.7 billion, and we're waiting to see what the details of that. And part of that is to look at COVID-19 short-term measures. So, you know, for ourselves in the city region here, we've been looking at bus and rail options around the asset base, because some of these stations are in the city centre. They have narrow pavement outside. So how are we going to queue that? How are we going to work with the commercial premises abutting a station and a hub? At some of the bus stops, they're in quite tight network of pavements. How do we give some more space to that? So there's some immediate short-term asks, as I would call it, in the sort of 0 to 3 month period, if I can put it that way around. And some of that money will start to address that immediate aspect of how do we make it safe when, on average, we can only carry maybe 20–25% capacity on bus and rail and other modes at this time as an approximation. So as long as the 2 metre distancing, which is the public health advice at the moment, and it's not, you know, it's not on the horizon whether that would be merged or when it would be merged, but it means that we've only got about 20–25% capacity. So what that really means is that our punctuality has to be maintained. So what we can't do is get a growth in car usage that then impedes on the city centres and wider remit to start delaying where we can move people when you're only at 20% of the capability carrying on the services you ran pre-COVID. So there's quite a lot of investment in there. In the medium and long term, we, within the Liverpool City Region, we had a journey strategy approved about 18 months ago with a 10-year investment plan. And what we're doing out of COVID is to go to those plans and accelerate them forward by the funding the government's made available. That will be part of our proposition on that side. So one of the aspects is we're accelerating further on active travel. What we have to watch is for road reallocation that we don't impact on bus. So if we take a lane out and bus is suddenly congested with cars in a reduced carriageway width, you could affect punctuality and reliability. And whilst we want to support active travel, we have to get that compromise between maintaining punctuality for mass transit, when hopefully we get some solution to this, that we can get back to a greater than 20% carrying capacity in buses and trains, which we've got at the moment. So that's where the investment's coming. That's what our thinking is in the short to medium term, so 3 to 12 months and 12 months beyond. Obviously, the government are going to look at repurposing finance because there's a considerable amount of money being redirected into COVID. But what we are maintaining, certainly in the city region here in Liverpool, is we're maintaining the development work. So while the development work is at a cost of maybe 5 to 10% of the overall project delivery cost, we are maintaining that momentum. So all the development work we're doing for transforming cities that we started, we've looked at the next 12 months and we will be maintaining that development work as part of that. So we might have constrained budgets, but we only need 5 to 10% of that budget in the next 12 months to keep that momentum. Because as we get towards recovery, we'll need those transport infrastructures coming on board along with business recovery in the wider economy.
Thanks, Shane. So I've been informed that there are plenty of questions, and it was indeed a technical issue at my end. So those have been shared with me. So many thanks to all of you I think we do have license to overrun somewhat here, so we will dive into a few of those questions now, if that's okay. First of all, what effect does the panel think that COVID will have on future investment and business cases? And in particular here, looking at some indirect effects, such as the likely shift away from the 9 to 5, 5-day working week and associated commuting towards more flexible and home working. And will this and the continued emphasis on tackling climate change mean that investments in new roads will become riskier? So I think I'd like to start with Gordon on that, but I suspect most of you may well have a perspective.
Hi, thank you. I mean, I think the impact is going to be significant, you know, and I look at it from a personal perspective. And prior to COVID, I travelled to London every week, flew from Scotland to London and back every week. And I haven't been in London now for 2 months, and nothing's changed. I've actually, I do feel that I'm a bit more efficient. Nothing's been held up. Work life has just progressed as normal, and in fact somewhat better. So all that travelling time that I used to moan about and all that negative impact that I've had on the environment by all those flights, I feel was totally now, and I'm surprised, maybe I'm just incredibly naive, but I'm surprised, was just totally unnecessary. I think going forward, the work will be, Macquarie is already very flexible working, but I think as a global organisation, the amount of travel that is undertaken will reduce significantly, and I would go as far as to say by 75%.
Wow, fantastic, bold prediction there. Kit, have you got a perspective on that?
Absolutely, and I think I've got a perspective on anything, I'm for hire. So, but what I would say is that, like I said, I think, you know, it's a well-known secret in the UK that WebTag isn't particularly functioning particularly well in terms of business cases, in terms of bringing in externalities and trying to make that cost model function properly, and that the DfT are looking at how they can potentially reconsider that. I think this crisis has potentially catalyzed that process and need to do it faster. And I think the other thing it's done, as Gordon just pointed out, is that the traditional model of transport planning is based around 9 to 5 commuting, people going to the office, and even long distance commuters like Gordon from Glasgow to London fly down maybe on a Tuesday and come back on a Wednesday having stayed in a hotel overnight. We can look into that and we kind of understand how those travel modes work. The tricky bit is getting the origin destination data and all that stuff for the modeling when we're looking at multi-chained trips, you know, dropping the kids off at school, going shopping, meeting someone else for a coffee, cycling back round, all of that stuff, and how we can enable that. But what we do know is that those trips are generally shorter. They're generally undertaken by women or stay-at-home people, and also that on top of that, they're all very local in their destination. At which point, a £27 billion road investment strategy to build new strategic roads seems woefully out of touch with both that and the incoming climate crisis.
Very true indeed. Joe, a question has come in for you on BP's progress with hydrogen production, distribution, and refueling stations, and whether you can give any kind of update. Plans are progressing in that regard, how it fits into your overall strategy.
So I'm afraid I'm going to be disappointing here to say that lives in another bit of the beast that is BP. For us in advanced mobility, hydrogen hasn't been a focus because we've been looking at the fleets that transition first, and for us that looks like passenger cars and LCVs. But hydrogen is on the agenda elsewhere, but I wouldn't be able to speak with any level of confidence on what that strategy is. Sorry.
No problem at all. So I do have an alternative question directed towards Joe and to Shane, which is whether you can give a bit more colour on the situation, in particular for SMEs and small businesses when it comes to accessing electric vehicle recharging solutions in particular. It's okay for the major fleets, but what about the local plumber?
I'll pick that up, Chris, first. I think to a certain extent, we work through representatives through the Chamber of Commerce here in Merseyside, as they do in other city regions, of course. And I think the challenge of the network on a wider remit was already covered by some of the speakers. There is a huge amount of investment. It will take a considerable time to put charging points in, for wider use to the public. It is something we want, but it does need a considered focus. Now, the government have started to think about that with the steering group and started to look at the network suppliers, which will be a key aspect of that. And to be honest with you, it will take a thought-through plan and a clear, a realistic implementation plan to think how we can roll that out, how we can trial it in an urbanizer and then look to roll that out. So that's one of our challenges going forward, I think, on that side. Perhaps, and I know it's slightly off key, but perhaps still on the electrical battery side, we're trialing electrical battery for rail, and it's part of our Transforming Cities investment, because if we can stretch outside the current Merseyrail network 20 miles, it means that we've got a static population of 1.6 million in Merseyside and a travel to work population of 2.5 million. And if we can go that extra 20 miles by battery, we're on the third rail, which is electrified rail on the ground. You'd have to do all the overhead rail and electric. It would save 30% of cost for that, and it would also be environment. So we're doing work on that. I know it's slightly moving away from your SME, but just on that agenda aspect of what we're doing to invest, those trials should be finished within the next 9 months to tell us whether we have that ability to go that 20 miles more off the rail network. But for SMEs, it's working in hand that we have to look to put a budget, support them through the chamber, and have a look at what sort of detailed program we can do for trials. For me, it's got to be trials that we need to try out practically in areas and try and get that forward as a sort of blueprint for others to follow.
Thanks, Shane. That question was directed to you as well, Joe, so feel free to jump in.
I was going to just say, just from BP's perspective, I mean, we're really keen to understand sort of what the right solution for SME fleets are, and that's something we're really thinking through at the moment. I guess it's as much as a function of the size of your fleet as the missions that the vehicles are undertaking. So how long are the journeys? At home, do they have a depot to go to? Can they slow charge overnight and then just have top-ups on the go? Will they require just on the go charging instead, because you can't electrify a depot or it's too costly? So what we're trying to do is work through to really understand what the SME pain points are. So any and all specifics really welcomed, to make sure that we can generate that range of options that help deliver on all of their needs.
Thanks, Joe. So we've had a couple of questions on the interplay between congestion and air quality. In particular, looking at whether there might be a risk that by driving the electrification of our vehicles, we might just be transferring a problem, and particularly with the installation of city centre charging infrastructure, driving increased congestion in certain areas. I think probably that's also one for Shane, but I think also Kit and Gordon and others, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. I'll go to you first, Shane.
Okay, I think you've highlighted really a very key point, and one is about air quality and congestion. And satisfying or solving an air quality doesn't solve congestion. So we need to think about that total transport journey. So getting into these city centres, even if we had all electric cars fleets there, you wouldn't solve anything on congestion if the same number of vehicles were making the same journey. So it's important that we have that integrated plan. So whether that is partial use of a car to a set point, and that's what we call about moderation of car use, not no car use, and it's the subtleties of that, how it links into your bus and rail mass movements to take them into those dense urban areas. That'll be part of that if I say that makeup of that solution. So the congestion side does need to be addressed. So looking at park and ride around perimeters and use of public transport as part of the solution, once we get back to more perhaps normal times where we can take above 20% of the capacity, which we've got for the next however period of time we've got directly in front of us at the moment. So for me, there'll be a mixture there. So I would say look at those. They are two separate issues. They are linked, but they're two separate issues and need slightly different solutions for those, for some of those answers.
So to jump in there, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's really important to think about how we incentivise the sort of use of a diversity of modes. So for consumers, we often now think of mobility as a service platforms that sort of help consumers navigate and book in one seamless experience. You know, it might be a car club, it might be a tube ticket, but also active travel modes, so e-scooters, bikes, e-bikes. And what we're really interested in is that's a seamless digital experience, a seamless platform that allows cities to help sort of deliver on their aims by actively nudging consumers to make different choices. For me, what I'm really interested in is that's all very well and good, but if your on the ground physical experience is full of friction, then it doesn't feel like it's like, you know, it's really going to unlock the potential it could. So, you know, anybody who knows me knows I love a mobility hub conversation. And I think there's real opportunities as cities start to think through how do you in one place integrate EV charging, car clubs, e-bikes, first and last mile lockers to enable people to move around differently. And so the fact that we're hosting one of those sites on a forecourt in Aral is a really great start. And you can saw it was a really key theme of all the future mobility zone conversations that came out, like what are these mobility hubs and how will people use them? But developing that network will help, it should help sort of shift people away from just solely using their own vehicles and avoid that, you know, potential uptick in congestion and for a pure vehicle to vehicle swap.
Fantastic, thanks.
Sorry, Chris, I'm just going to talk over you now.
Please do.
I think that's very, and that carrot, that incentivization, that making it as easy and seamless as possible to use alternative modes is really, really important. But I think what we need to do is have a grown-up conversation with all road users, including the motorists, and say, look, space is the main problem in city centres. This is regardless of COVID, but it's especially the case when COVID means we all need more space than ever before. If I sit down and look at Liverpool's transport hierarchy, or Manchester's, or London's, or Glasgow's, or Edinburgh's, they'll all say that pedestrians come on the top, then it's cyclists, then it's probably buses, disabled users and freight, and then private cars down at the bottom. So if we're sitting down looking at allocating space in order to make this work, then that means that once we've got space for pedestrians and cyclists and buses and freight deliveries servicing, then we can create space for cars. Now, I don't know about you, but in a lot of city centres, that space simply isn't there. We have the policies in place. We just aren't actually using them because we don't want to have that really awkward conversation where we tell people that they can't drive. Instead, we say, have you thought of getting a bus? Have you tried a park and ride? Look how much easier we've made it for you. Here's a little incentive. And I think we need to have a grown-up conversation as a country and say, look, this is how it's going to have to be now. It's going to be awkward, and I don't know how you bring these people along. That's one of the questions that I'm here to try and explore and learn from everyone else. But I think that's the conversation that needs to happen. And this opportunity, and it's terrible to use that word in relation to the current crisis, but that opportunity is now, when people are suddenly realizing that the air is cleaner, they can hear birds, that actually it's nice that the kids can play in the street. We're suddenly realizing all those externalities that Shane was talking about, that if you replace cars with electric cars, you still have, aren't there. The world's a better place. How can we keep it like this? And how can we make that the case for cities throughout the land?
Thanks, Kit. I think that's a really valid point, and I don't think there's any shame in treating this as an opportunity, despite the very serious negative impacts of the pandemic. And I do think we should be able to drive seismic change as a result of the natural kind of rebalancing of society that we've seen during this period of time. We have now overrun by 15 minutes, and I'm sure people are keen to head for some lunch. What I'd like to do now, very briefly, is get each of the panelists to leave us with a parting thought of just 30 seconds or so for people to consider as they go on with their day. So I'd like to do this from each of you in return. Kit, you've just given us, I think, the start of one there, but I would like to let you go first to kind of build on that and give us your parting words.
I think the only thing I really want to add to what I just said is that this is a great chance to reconsider how we do things. We've known for a long time that the system is broken, but we've always put it in the too difficult box, or we've always hoped that technology will save us, and that if we get some whizzy app that will make it better, then we solve the problem. Combine that with a bit of electricity from over here, and somehow magically mobility will fix itself. We know that isn't actually going to be the case, but it's the easy option. It's one we've always done. hence why transport greenhouse gases have kept on staying steady while everything else has declined. And I think we now need to just have that conversation and turn around and say, look, people are dying as a result of this, let alone the long-term impacts, let alone the cost to society, the fact that it's entirely unsustainable to us and to the planet and to the economy. So why can't we have that conversation? And what I want anyone who's listening to do, who's interested in this, is to have that conversation, start pushing it forward. And yeah, please connect with me and we'll see what we can do.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Kit. Gordon, would you mind going next?
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, I mean, I think not a lot to add to what Kit said there. I think it was Machiavelli that said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." It sounds a wee bit inappropriate given the current context, but if anything can come out of this that just generates that discussion that Kit so eloquently described, then it would be positive, because it needs to happen. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Shall I go? So I was going to say, the only thing I'd add is that none of us can do this on our own. Like, if we're really going to create that new mobility ecosystem that we want, then it's going to need partnerships and new ways of working from across the public and private sector with big, companies like BP and small startups. So actually trying to think innovatively about how we partner to deliver some of this change is really important. Otherwise, we will end up with a quagmire of conversations and bureaucracy, and progress will be slower than it needs to be.
Thank you very much. Apologies for not introducing you there. I'm having some mic issues my end. But Shane, over to you to close us out.
Okay, I would say, as brought up a little bit earlier, the key part is taking advantage of active travel. So active travel is a very unique position that's come into, and taking advantage of that. In Merseyside, over 60% of journeys are less than 5 kilometres. So the option for walking and cycling, although that message has been there a long time, is probably never more fertile ground now to make that change. So those benefits, those things we've had to do on walking and cycling that we didn't do 2.5 months ago, are the ones that the campaign must be that we need to engender that, because that's the real step change. And it's in that little window we've got there at the moment that offers it to be the word sustainable. And I think that's, if I was part of that, that's that, hold on to those habits and bring them into your working life.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Shane. And thank you very much to all four of our presenters and panelists today, and to the organising committee at the Smart Transport Conference. I think it's been a really, really useful session. So many thanks to everyone involved. And as I say, once again, to Shane Fitzpatrick, Gordon Young, Kit Allwinter, and Joe Daly. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.